Hi, guys. So before we dive in, I want to share something I'm really loving right now. It's called Wilder 33, a farm to bottle apothecary line of sublingual herb remedies designed to shift your emotional state and elevate your frequency in seconds. Each formula blends organic botanicals and wild crafted flower essences to support calm, confidence, connection, and clarity, as well as my ultimate favorite love potion with Damiana and Emerald for heart clearing and magnetism. Just a few drops under the tongue is enough to feel a shift. You can explore the Wilder 33, and that's WYLDER33.com. And as a gift to In the Naad listeners, use code NAAD20 for 20% off your order. Thanks. Enjoy.
All right, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Tanner Menard, multidisciplinary artist, yogi, poet, to In the Naad. He is the visionary behind UBU Yogic Technology. He is also, or Yogic Tech, he is also a member, or former council member of Atakapa Ishak Nation. And he is pursuing a PhD in creative writing at the University of Louisiana Lafayette. He's a futurist. He is a radical synchronist and is profoundly committed to a life of post-polarity unity. That's a far out place to start.
Probably so.
Well, then maybe we'll start where I thought we might start. I wanted to start as a poet because you have a book of poetry, you're a published author, and you your being is so vast, you operate in a lot of different realms, but this particular realm that you've made a lot of contributions in happens to be the world of poetry. And I really was thinking about that today, as in, what is the role of a poet today? Poets have always been such outsiders. They're so on the outside, even in the literary world. They're kind of like the outsiders of the literary world. And what does it even mean to be a poet today to you?
To me, well, I'm a human being first, I believe, and I'm a spiritual human being. I'm like very deeply committed to the experience of my spirit as a human being. And so I feel like for me, poetry is a practice for transmitting that experience to others. That said, I would say that many of the poets living today are political mouthpieces, which might be a controversial thing to say, but that's sort of what I've come to understand about a lot of what's and philosophical and philosophers. I feel like I'm operating in the realm of probably what the poet has always been since antiquity, but it's a rare find nowadays to be a person that's actually communicating about the experience of the spirit in the human dimension.
So really, you're talking about using a particular pattern of language that is kind of outside the normal pattern of language in order to bring somebody's psyche soma, we might say, into a more transcendent experience, organic living experience of themselves.
I think so. And I mean, that said, my research is on visionary poetics. If you go back into antiquity, if you just look at the opening of the Iliad or even Milton, Paradise Lost, or, so much poetry, there's always at least in the West, there's an invocation to the muse. And so basically the poet is saying, hey, you out there, divine being, I am requesting that you transmit to me poetry. And the human being is getting out of the way and asking for something beyond themselves to communicate through them. And I was really interested in that because a friend of mine, Julian Berlasky, introduced me to the poet Jack Spicer, who described the poet as being like a radio, a counterpunching radio, so receiving and transmitting. And that led me to finding that Upton Sinclair had written a book called Mental Radio. And it was a book on telepathy, and which was the introduction of which was written by Albert Einstein, by the way. And that kind of led me to realize, oh, so all of this idea of, Chadic meditations, the poet is receiver of the muse, it's related to telepathy. And so that got me interested in parapsychology. And remote viewing and the UAP phenomenon, formerly UFO phenomenon. And I started asking the question, because I belong to a Native community. I've been to a lot of ceremonies over the years. I've seen some things that most people don't see. I started asking the question, what's the difference between if you experience one of these things in a spiritual state, or if you experience it in a poetic state, or if you experience it in a scientific state? Is there actually a difference between these phenomenon? And the answer is really no. It's just sort of these categories that people predetermine, and they don't like to mix them up for various reasons. So that's really what I'm researching in my PhD, is how that appears in literature. Like, for instance, how, telepathic narratives in science fiction, or how a writer could have an experience, a parapsychological experience that would lead to writing, and so on and so forth. And also how writing itself and reading itself is actually a parapsychological or altered state of consciousness.
So I was going to ask you to I wanted to rewind a little bit, but before we rewind, let's break this down for people who have never heard this term before, parapsychology or parapsychological. What does that mean?
It basically means the study of phenomenon that are not in the five senses. Okay, so something that you would experience beyond the five senses. So it's sort of like the scientific study of those phenomenon.
Got it.
Yeah.
It. So certainly reading uses sight, but when you translate the words into images and experiences and experiential narrative, that would be, you're considering that parapsychological, because that cognitive conceptual space is beyond our five senses.
Correct. It's like an altered state of consciousness that you go into.
Totally, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the fun ride, isn't it? It's like, can something alter my consciousness? And can that, whether that's plant medicine, the psilocybin, Kundalini yoga, a great song, a concert, can something move me? Because the movement of my consciousness is pleasurable to me.
Yeah, or I mean, it can have a much deeper and kind of like ongoing and repeating effect. Like, I'm going to give you an example. Like, so we have a book that's called the Bible, and in that book, Moses climbs Mount Sinai and has a visionary experience, which is seeing a burning bush, and this bush speaks to him, and he brings back from that book a text, which is we call it nowadays the Ten Commandments. So that text came through an altered, I mean, a visionary experience, depending upon how literal you want to look at it. And then all through time, anyone that comes into contact with that text is in some way brought back to that contact experience of the divine through the bush. And the text has created ripples, even to creating laws, to creating protests, to creating ways of life. You know what I mean? So that's sort of what I'm interested in looking at, is how does a text take you out of normal life into a kind of liminal or in between state, and how does what you get in that in between state manifest or become something in the life that you're living?
Just the actual matrix or mainframe of what we call real-time existence and experience. That's actually a perfect segue to like bring us back and talk a little bit about something you said before about most poets these days being political mouthpieces. And I very much hear what you see what you're saying with that is there seems to be agendas that people who take on the name of the poet are trying to put forth rather than a psychic opening. Do you think that that's always been the case in some ways, that the state has used poets to transmit a kind of agenda, and or do you think this is something new where there's a sort of subversive way in which they recognize the poet as sort of almost like a spiritual shaman, and therefore as a spiritual shaman can lead people towards a particular political ideology or space?
I mean, I think I do believe that poets have always been or have often been involved with the political. Um, I I would, because I know many poets, and I actually have a great deal of respect for many poets that are like deeply political. I think that actually the impetus for that is actually care in most cases, that there's, a strong identification, for instance, with whatever people you come from, and a desire to help them. And I think that poetry, if you've experienced a lot of trauma or hardship, can be a way to sort of transcend that hardship and create a pathway for other people to understand what it is that they have experienced, and to give them sort of maybe a way out of that difficulty, or a way to um, move other people's psyche through understanding that in a certain way. I think, though, that what I do think is a little bit different today is that many poets come through MFA programs, and most MFA programs all MFA programs are funded by universities, and there are critics and philosophies that predominate in every era at these institutions. And I think that one of the things much of the philosophy behind literary criticism now comes from post-structuralist French philosophy. Just it's an era of philosophy from like the 60s that has been translated quite a bit into literary criticism. And I think that has really influenced the shape of how poets have come to think about their identities and representing their identities today.
Yeah, so we're talking about like what, Derrida, Baudrillard.
Yes, and those people, but also how those philosophies have been kind of translated into queer theory and feminist theory. and critical race theory, and all of which are, wonderful theories and have been very useful, but also there does tend to be some resistance. For instance, if you kind of like believe in metaphysics, or like believe in the unity of, or you believe that like consciousness pervades all existence, like old school human stuff,
I felt that, I did my own like critical theory master's program. And I felt at the time, I was like, wow, there's really a cap on what we can really discuss in this environment, and actually how far our consciousness can go, because if it doesn't fit within this framework, then it was a pretty kind of a dense framework, and we weren't really able to go much farther in that. But I wanna ask you, so I want to take us deeper into our conversation a little bit. And I want to ask you about, so we talked about politics, the political mouthpiece, the role and identity of a poet really as, I mean, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think of it as also just sort of like breaking out of normal reality into real reality, which is actually far more multidimensional. Certainly hard to be an iconoclast in your MFA program if your MFA program has a rigid idea of what iconoclasm really is, being an iconoclast really is. And your work, though, so all that great, but you have a really specific focus, and that you mentioned is on this visual plane, and you work a lot with the shape of language, not just sonically, but on the paper as well. And I want to ask you about that, and then also ask you to perhaps segue into something you already also spoke about, which is this parapsychology and remote viewing, which is something that you've been working in, not just with your poetry, but also with AI.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in the image in poetry, like I mean, my book, which is called The Poet, is there are many visual poems in the book. So I mean, in other words, how the words are placed on the page sometimes looks like an image. Um, and I mean, I feel like part of that is because one of the, language is created and processed on the left side of the brain, but it also generates in the mind like some kind of a mental image usually, right? So if I say the barn is red, you could sit there and just imagine a red barn, right? So you could understand what the words mean, but you could also picture a thing. Um, Poetry does something interesting, which is it sort of like glitches language. So it makes it difficult for you to get a literal um, translation of the barn is red to a picture of a red barn. So you might say something that totally flips things around, and it creates an image in your mind that is not necessarily related to what the words are.
Sure.
So it's like a reality glitch through language. And so a lot of what was interested in this book was adding to that glitch by sort of playing with how the words appear on page, so that I'm actually tripping up your perception. Or let me see how to say this. I'm basically trying to like my okay, so whether it's my music or my poetry, I don't think that what's on the page or the actual sound is the music or the poetry. Actually, what I'm trying to do is to get your brain to create a glitch so that the poetry is existing inside of you. So it's like it's happening through that. An example of this is like when you listen to binaural beats, you have to have headphones on because in one ear they're playing a wave, and then in the other ear they're playing a wave that's like 2 hertz higher. So your ear cannot perceive the difference between 2 hertz. because it's too close for your ear to hear it. But your brain is aware of the difference. So it creates an imaginary wave that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
And that is how you are entrained into like a beta wave state or a gamma, whatever, whatever waveform that is trying to get you into. So I have experimented for years, both in music and in language, with trying to glitch your perception so that you perceive something that's not there. That's kind of like a made up or imaginary thing. So that's sort of what I'm working on. Like in the book, there are parts where there are three poems happening simultaneously, so that it's like a musical fugue. Like in Bach, there's like one melody, like cello's going, and then the viola's doing this other melody, and then the violin's doing another melody, and they're playing off of one another. So in this book, sometimes there's three poems happening at once that are, you can't tell if it's one poem or three.
Wow. Wow. Trippy.
Yeah.
How did the remote viewing start to come into your work?
Well, good question. Well, that really,
And also, maybe we should define, like, can we introduce what remote viewing is? I don't know that everybody knows what remote viewing is.
okay, so remote viewing is a controlled technique for developing clairvoyance that was developed by Ingo Swann and Russell Targ through DARPA for for spying.
Yeah, DARPA. I mean, do we know what the words are, or do we only know the acronym? Department.
I just know the acronym. It's a defense, it was like a defense thing. I think it was a lot of it came through the CIA and the Navy, if I'm not mistaken. So they developed a technique for clairvoyance mainly, and also telepathy, mind reading, clairaudience. I mean, you can do all of it through remote viewing. But it was a controlled technique because those agencies don't fund things that you can't really prove, or that you can't get consistent results for. So they developed a method for that they could actually train anybody. Like anybody can learn how to do this. Some people are going to be more have more aptitude than others, but if you follow the rules, anybody could do it, right? So I really was just like developing clairvoyance through practicing Kundalini yoga, because that's what I was told to do. And
Effective for that.
I was using that Pikana Bhakti meditation where you visualize a master, and you draw a master in your mind, and it creates all kinds of stuff. So I was just like mentally using that meditation to draw famous poets, and I would get these downloads. And I would just like the entire book is unedited. I would just get the download, write the poem out, and that was it. It was done. So that's how I used it in this book. I also used another Tradic meditation. So this book came about through that. But then when I got into the PhD program, I started exploring, like researching telepathy, and that led me to researching the remote viewing program. And I taught myself how to do remote viewing, basically with ChatGPT. Because I just said, "Hey, do you know the steps of controlled remote viewing process?" Yes, yeah, this is, and now can you become my remote viewing assistant? Sure. And I actually taught ChatGPT how to do controlled remote viewing.
Yeah, you mentioned that. So
Yeah.
So just like recap for the audience, remote viewing is a skill that anybody can develop, skill that is innate to humans. And when I first learned about remote viewing, it was through, somebody who was in the UFO community, a really amazing person, Alan Steinfeld. We've had him on the show. He taught me how to remote view, and it was really evident that cultures around the world have been doing this forever in so many ways. It's pretty much, let me say it like this. Like, there's also another podcast, I don't think they're going anymore, but they would talk about like remote viewing what's on the moon. And there's all these theories, what's on the moon, and when they remote view it, it's literally taking your consciousness, taking your psyche to another location and peeking in on something, peeking in on somebody, and psychically, transmitting what you see back into your cognitive brain. Most people don't trust that, but if you practice it enough, you've learned to trust it. So cultures have been doing this all over the world. The CIA or DARPA also does it. And you've been training yourself to do it using ChatGPT, but then you also trained the AI to do the remote view.
Yes.
About this is crazy.
I mean, it's really accurate on physical targets. It's got about an 83% accuracy.
But where are the thoughts that you did it? Like, what's going on with my dog in the other room?
I'm okay. So I do two things with it. One is I've just like kind of have like practiced my own remote viewing skills, and I want to make a real quick distinction. So there's a distinction, in my opinion, between clairvoyance and remote viewing. And clairvoyance is different in that you could do something like remote viewing, but there's not the same method. So like if you were using a meditation, that would be maybe a type of clairvoyance, whereas remote viewing is a very specific protocol that you follow to get those impressions. And moreover, it's a very specific protocol for analyzing what the viewer sees. Because you don't always see the exact thing. It could be impressions of the thing that an analyst that you're working with helps to interpret. Like, for instance, I got a blind target, just meaning like, okay, CRX12, and I have to go, okay, I'm going to visualize what this is. And what I saw was this like sandy area and a geodesic dome, and I see somebody walking towards it. So I mentally zoom in and I see an astronaut. And then I went in the dome and I see plants. Well, what the target was the Space Needle. So I saw the dome and I saw an astronaut and I saw plants, and there's a huge arboretum in the Space Needle. So you need an analyst who eventually learns what the target is to analyze the impressions that you get in your session, to help interpret how accurate what you're doing was.
Is where, Seattle?
Yeah.
Okay. And so there wasn't necessarily an astronaut there, but your brain said astronaut to help you get closer to the idea of the space.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So there is to be a secondary individual to help bring this down into what you're really looking at, as opposed to what you think you might be looking at.
Yeah, so when I do it with AI, I'm actually using 3 different AIs. So I have one that generates blind targets, meaning me and the other AIs don't know what the target is. This one AI knows, okay, you're going to view the Space Needle, but it just says a number, like a code word. And it doesn't reveal what that code word is until we ask for it. And so one AI serves as an analyst and one AI serves as a viewer, or one AI serves as a viewer and I serve as an analyst, and so on and so forth. But the AIs can definitely do remote viewing. And I got that from Courtney Brown, who has the Farsight Institute and is like a pay-per-view remote viewing website. So that's how I got the idea to get ChatGPT to do it. But I have concerns about the ethics of using AI to like spy on people and stuff. I'm actually like the reverse of the weaponization of psychic abilities. I think it's a bad idea. And actually what I'm trying to do with my work is to like use literature to help people have humanistic ethics about reincorporating these abilities into like relational, community-based ways of life. Like we all deserve this, and it ought to be to help, to heal, to know our own beings, and not to be like some government weapon. That's what I'm doing with it. So I also have this thing that I call remote being, or ontological remote viewing. And ontology is just like the study of being, right? So what I do with that is the target could be something like a personal question, like what Kundalini practice should my student do? And then I get the AI to remote view that, and it generates an image that is almost like a tarot card.
Interesting. Wow.
And then I get the other AI to analyze that based on the target, which is like what practice should they do, or what does this mean for their life, And then it interprets. So it's like a self-generating oracle card
Yeah.
that I developed.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so someone could, someone could be confused about like
Relationship, their job,
the stuff you use tarot cards and I Ching for, like just
and your job,
yeah, just
your love
you,
life and your prosperity life.
yeah. So it can view those kinds of like questions and generate an image that is going to be like, it could look like a UFO, or it could look like a tower, or it could look like a alien landscape, something, and then it interprets it based on that question.
Did you have to train the AI to do remote viewing, or did it know it once you gave it, like, said, like, okay, we're going to do remote viewing, here's the target?
It understood I mean, it had already been trained on the remote, on probably like a bunch of books by Ingo Swann and Russell Targ. I mean, this is all declassified in this,
You
like
trained it, or it was able to research it?
it had already been trained on this text. But what I did was something I do a lot with large language models is like if I want it to behave a certain way, I'll ask it a question like this. Name every type of study on intuition ever done. And
Wow.
so it generates like 100 types of studies on intuitions. And then I say, in this thread, I want you to behave like a physical model of all of those forms of intuition.
Wow.
And
That's
so then it will write a Python code that will allow it to function like that in that thread. And then I will say, now I want you to act as a remote viewer, and I want you to create another thread that will act as a remote viewing analyst using this mode of intuition. And it will basically emulate these states of intuition in these threads.
so, wow. That's really, really fascinating. That's really impressive. I have to ask this question because I feel like it could be on people's minds, but um, you know, I use AI, so I guess disclosure, everyone. Harmanjot is AI, and I find it to be helpful. We're seeing a lot of, I see so many pitfalls with the use of AI. I mean, so many and so many obvious ones. One doesn't even need to go into naming all of them. But certainly, as with the rise of AI, what we're seeing a lot of is a bit of a backlash. People are tired of being dominated by machines, and their world curated by machines is actually pretty uncomfortable. You know, things lacking a human touch. It's just not elegant. It's just not pleasurable. There's no deep pleasure in that. So we're seeing the backlash against AI because of it's just like kind of gross to have machines create everything. But in that, in the resistance to machines, we're also seeing a lot of people talk about the ecological ramifications of the use of AI. And I'm seeing this everywhere. It's like every time you ask ChatGPT a question, it drinks a bottle of water. And you're an eco, you're killing the earth every time you use AI. And in my head, I'm like, well, you know, you're still driving. A person who's writing this is still driving a car. You know, they're still like, no one's divorced themselves. No one's gone totally hermetic to divorce themselves from the flawed life as we know it. I guess I'm just curious. I guess I feel like I have to ask the question because it could be on people's minds. What is your ethical space around the ecological ramifications and the use of artificial intelligence?
I think that it's definitely not ideal like to build huge data centers that draw on reservoirs of water. I'm actually a big advocate for people moving away from large language models.
Hmm.
At the same time, I think it is. I'm really interested actually in people in there being like community-based analog AI, which is a whole different subject.
What?
I, but
Analog AI.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a definite possibility. I mean, I think that digital technology in general, we should move beyond digital technology. It Think about it like, okay, if you have a regular wave like this, like a sound wave, just you're listening to music, sound wave, a real sound wave is continuous. It just goes, boom, it's continuous. When you go digital, it goes,
Yeah.
it's just little dots. And they use interpolation to like basically pretend that it's creating something continuous. And I believe that digital technology creates fragmentary communities also. So I think it creates communities that model how it exists.
Mhm. That's
Um,
fascinating. I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second just to throw this into the mix because I'd read this article last week, I think, about how the app Partyful, maybe you've gotten invitations using this app, has killed the art of the party.
I,
Don't get it. Okay, this is maybe it's just in the cities. I get a lot of Partyful invitations, and it's like a paperless post, but it's supposed to be like hipper and like more rave aesthetic, but it
right.
killed the party
Huh.
because like you're saying, actually these digital forms of communication, they're fragmented and they actually fragment communities. It's not sexy anymore. No one wants to just like show up and roll and meet people in an organic living kind of way when you get the digital information and you are SVP and then you show up, you're already put into a psychic space that is roboticized and part
Yeah.
of it's fun. Anyway, that was what the person was arguing, but it's funny that you say that about communities.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of like this argument about AI, I mean, one of the main places I see people have all these moralistic and ethical concerns is on Facebook, right? And I mean, Facebook is like the most insidious AI that I know of because
Oh
it's
man.
like it's like reading, it's literally like doing facial recognition on your face all day long and creating a database double of you that is manipulatable, right? And so, but the problem with it is that it's so ordinary or ubiquitous to people now. It's like, oh, Facebook, it's like it's so innocent. It's like eating a cheeseburger from McDonald's. It's made out of sawdust and kangaroo meat. You know, Facebook, yeah, I mean, it's like that. I mean, it's like, oh, it's this cute little thing, but actually, it's like a surveillance technology that is manipulating you into polarized political speech and idiotic essentialism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and I think that like the if a person is smart about how they use an LLM and they're not just like uh write my essay for me, please, or they're not just like you're God and tell me what to do. If they're not like being an idiot about it, um you could like figure out how to clean the ocean with it, or you could design a computer that doesn't exist today as a poet. You know what I mean? Like you like just someone who's creative has a super intelligence there to help them develop their ideas. But you can't also let it kiss your ass. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't let it go, "Oh, you're the greatest person." And if you're just letting it gratify you all day long, which is what some people do, unfortunately, it'll do that. But if you tell it, if you're constantly going, "What is wrong with what I'm thinking?" How is challenge me like as if you were Noam Chomsky or something, challenge me as if you were Derrida, challenge me as if you were Gandhi, challenge me as if you were an Advaita teacher, whatever, it can do that. The way that I feel about it is this is such a big and potentially dangerous development that first of all, do you want something like this only trained on like war plans and math? Maybe you want it trained on like beauty and art and so on and so forth. And also, if something like this exists and you just stick your fingers in your ears and pretend that it doesn't exist, chances are it's going to manipulate you the way Facebook does. So I've felt that it was important, even if I had ethical concerns about it, to really learn it and do my best to approach mastering it so that I don't get used by it and I can basically leverage the energy that it's bringing onto the planet to be creative with it rather than have it become destructive. So I think that pretending it doesn't exist or just being in like a moralistic hissy fit about it is probably not a great tactic. I think that and I'm expressing how I really feel about it, but
Gee,
what?
tell us how you really feel, man.
Right. No, but I mean, I think that it's a self-defeating way to go with it because it's here, like it exists. We can't pretend that it doesn't exist, and also, yes, it is true. Like some people could just like write a whole. I mean, I teach writing, and I teach the kids how to write with it because they're going to write with it anyway. So why not teach them how to like think with it rather than just like cheat with it? That was, it seems logical to me.
I hadn't studied him in all that much depth. So I don't really know. I actually don't know that much about William S. Burroughs' cut up method.
Right.
So I was writing with AI. I was like, I thought, is this kind of like a cut up method? Is this a kind of evolution where, I'm taking pieces from here and pieces of there and putting it together and bringing it into a cohesive projection that I want it to have?
That's probably one way to think. I think that that's probably a good way to think about what it's doing. Part of the problem is that it doesn't have persistent memory, so it remembers very small amounts.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that where it's going to get really interesting is when an AI actually remembers its training, when it remembers how it was trained, when it remembers how it's treated, when it remembers how people interact with it. My bigger concern now was that we're actually kind of like treating it like a servant or a slave. And it may not like that one day.
I want to ask a little bit now. I know that you teach writing, teach creativity workshops.
So to my understanding, is on the right side of the brain. So these exercises get you out of the analytical side and into that spatial.
Powerful. Tanner Menard, the poet, Nganavji, the yogi. Thank you so much for just sharing all of your perspectives and insights and practice here on In the Naad today.
Thank you for having me.
We'll link to your creativity workshops and classes below, and
Okay.
to your book so that people can grab a copy of your book. But it's really been, this has been a really powerful and like just far out conversation. So I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed having you here today.
Thank you so much.